Oh, forgot to add myself to the stream. What a beginning. Sorry, I'm just too excited. There's quite a lot going on right now. And breathe. Funny enough, something quite similar is probably being said to Liz Truss at this very moment. Where to begin? We're doing a very impromptu live stream because I think it would have been kind of rude not to, given the circumstances. If you just joined us, if you just tuned in, maybe you've had a busy day, the Prime Minister's gone. So just to bear in mind, just to put that in perspective, by the time a new Prime Minister takes over, which is probably going to happen in a week, that's the timescale, Britain will have had nearly 30% of its Prime Ministers since World War II in the last 6 years. So since 2016, about 30% of Britain's Prime Ministers, bear in mind, World War II ended 77 years ago, 30% of them in the last 6 years. But what makes this even more incredible is there hasn't been a change of government in that time. It's not as though, it's been a period of political instability in the sense that there's lots of parties taking over in different, Labour, Tory, because they're too unstable in government. The same people have been in power. This is a political death cult. They chewed up David Cameron. They chewed up Theresa May. They chewed up Boris Johnson. They've chewed up Liz Truss, the shortest serving Prime Minister in the history, of course, of British democracy, and now, or just in British history, actually, sorry, democracy aside. And now the next victim is about to take over. Of course, we will be talking about that. Now, obviously, you might think a bit of schadenfreude. I think we need to be careful there because obviously the consequences of what Liz Truss have done are pretty catastrophic for millions of people who've already, and I do always mention the statistic because you can't understand the plight of this country, which has been turned into a burning skip by the Conservatives over the last 12 years. You can't understand the plight without one single statistic. The longest squeeze in living standards for workers since the Napoleonic age. And that's before what's about to hit. That's before, obviously, in terms of the cost of living crisis, that was already going to be exacerbated. Interest rates are already going to go up. But also, of course, what Liz Truss has done in a absolutely calamitous few weeks in office. People are going to be paying the price of what she's done for years to come. So we've got a lot to talk about because what I actually do want to talk about, by the way, which is why we've got Faiza Shaheen, who's one of the best in the business, let's be honest with you. The reason I want to talk about it with her is because I think the easy thing to do would just be, if you want political commentary, which is British politics being a soap opera, it's like EastEnders, when you get the kind of end of season finale. We've had quite a lot of end of season finales, to be fair. In the last few years, it's just been one thing after the other, let's be honest. I don't just want this to be a soap opera, even though we'll talk about runners and riders, I'm sure. Actually, I think this is about an economic model which is broken, which cannot provide rising living standards. And I don't think you can understand the political turmoil that has enveloped this country without looking at that basic fact. So we do have a lot to talk about. If you're watching live, do click on the YouTube link and press like and subscribe, obviously. Leave your comments. If you want to support the channel, as you notice, we've been very much more active as of late. Sorry, it's just you can support the show. Sorry, with super chat, as Peter O'Donovan has just done by saying one long LSD trip. I suppose he's just talking about British politics. I mean, it's a pretty. If this is a trip, it's not a good trip. I would say something has gone wrong. You're either not in a good place when you took the LSD, or you've been given some pretty dodgy stuff, which I would not recommend taking again. Anyway, it is a trip. Anyway, you can support us on Super Chat like Peter O'Donovan has done, which keeps this channel on the road. And obviously, as you can see at the moment, we're just pumping out videos every single day. Obviously, we've got lots of documentaries we've done, like the Tory conference video, like the Labour conference video, and the documentaries that we've got planned because of your support. You can support us on patreon.com/Owen Jones 84 and also you listen to us on the podcast. Right, let's bring in Faiza. Hello, Faiza. You didn't expect me to do that.
No.
I was waiting for you to be like, just turn around. Got it. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, okay. I mean, it's hard to keep on top of things right now, isn't it?
It is a little bit. I mean, just for those who, you should know who Faiza Shaheen is. If you don't, then that's your fault, frankly. But Faiza is a brilliant economist and writer and used to direct the Class think tank, but is also now a parliamentary candidate who is literally now going to take. I know you wouldn't want me to say this because you're like, you can't take the voters for granted, fighting for every vote. But standing in Chingford and Woodford Green, against Ian Duncan Smith, who was obviously, I was going to say one of the worst Tories, but it's just too many.
There's so many. He was Liz Truss's campaign manager though, so he has a lot to answer for.
Well, maybe he should appoint Liz Truss as his campaign manager in the election, just to kind of. What do you reckon?
That would be great. I mean, I think, and there's such a long list. I mean, they've been in charge for so long now, and obviously, someone like Ian Duncan Smith that was so involved in austerity. I mean, there's such a long list of things that he's done. But yeah, at this point, I ran in 2019 as well and got pretty close. But at this point, I think a lot of people have woken up to the absolute disaster, which is the Tories.
I mean, I was obviously devastated by 2019, full stop. But that result, when you did, because you really are like, you're the real deal, Faiza. I'm sorry, I don't normally just brown nose when you come on this note, but you are, because you're just honestly, you're going to be one. We're so lucky that Labour have actually you have been selected as a parliamentary candidate.
It wasn't easy.
No, but you won every single branch. People wanted you overwhelmingly. That's what's striking. You came so close last time, but do you know what? People, the next election, which we'll talk about, people are going to be like, did you stay up for Ian Duncan Smith? And they're going to watch literally millions of people are going to watch you with your Labour rosette kicking Ian Duncan Smith out. It's going to be a joyous moment.
Well, let's hope. There's a lot of this old guard that goes, right? We need a massive reset in politics. So let's hope it's a night where people stay up because there's one after another. And let's hope it's soon.
Boris Johnson gone, maybe. I mean, at the moment, polling would suggest.
Smog, yeah.
What I might do just quickly is people just to relive the moment. Should we see Liz Truss resigning again? I think we should. Let's have a little refresh, shall we?
Time of great economic and international instability. Families and businesses were worried about how to pay their bills. Putin's illegal war in Ukraine threatens the security of our whole continent, and our country has been held back for too long by low economic growth. I was elected by the Conservative Party with a mandate to change this. We delivered on energy bills and on cutting national insurance. And we set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party. This morning I met the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. We've agreed that there will be a leadership election to be completed within the next week. This will ensure that we remain on a path to deliver our fiscal plans and maintain our country's economic stability and national security. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
Do you know what? Look, I mean, obviously she's messed up, but, let he who has not set the British economy on fire cast the first stone. Brilliant content creator. Brilliant.
Honestly. So many memes. Honestly, Twitter has really kept me going. All of the memes in recent weeks have been amazing. We are, in that way, the British are like the best. We do have like great people that just jump on and manage to turn everything she says into a meme in 5 seconds.
I mean, to be fair, yeah, you're right. Maybe that's a British kind of feature we should be proud of. But she provided, give her some credit. She provided a lot of great material on a plate, I would say. Oh my word! I just want to start. Yeah. So just in terms of, because I'm going to talk about I want to talk about Trussonomics. That's I'm quite interested in and we'll talk about what comes next kind of stuff. Firstly, what's your reaction to what's just happened? And I guess the crisis. There's a Wikipedia page, British government crises of 2022, which is now just month by month. It's a very long page. Is what I'm trying to say. What's your just take on just what has happened to this country?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is in a way a long time coming. I think just kind of recently, Trussonomics, I think one thing that was interesting was just how quickly the markets reacted, and actually them reacting quite strongly against this type of very obvious cut the taxes on the rich, what we would call state capture, essentially the kind of rich ruling for themselves in this really obvious way at a time of crisis. And so, I've been thinking that maybe there is an extreme like the one that Liz presented that's really obvious to the world that cannot really work anymore. And that's, in some ways, that's good news. I don't really like the idea that the markets are dictating our politics, but at the same time, I thought that was interesting the way they reacted, because in a sense, it was the people in the city that were getting a pay rise or not having their bonus cap. So I think in that way, it was interesting. I think there's a lot of bad news here around the privilege of the elite and the people at the top. The fact that they can just change leadership and do what they want. Even today, hearing conservative commentators and MPs talk about not needing a general election. I think that's quite frightening. And that is, for me, as someone that's looked at inequality trends for a long time in the UK and abroad, that level of privilege that is really built up through wealth and wealth accumulation at the top is quite frightening. The good news is, I think potentially we're going to have a realignment now. And I think it's gone too far and people are waking up to that. I think the big thing for us, though, as progressives is like, what model we put there in its place.
Faiza for future Labour leader. She's great. Already comments coming in like that. In terms of Trustonomics, I wanted to start by giving her some credit. Okay, oddly, in that the diagnosis she made about Britain being a low growth economy was correct. What's just slightly odd about it is what she venerated, Thatcherism, is because she even spoke about growing up in the 1980s, and that's what really drove her into realizing these inequities she had to address. Like, what you mean Thatcher's Britain, which you grew up in, Liz? Okay, weird flex, but fine. But she, like, since the 80s, I mean, the 80s had the same economic growth on average as the 1970s, which was just less equitably distributed. And the 70s had a crisis because of the oil shock and so on. But since then, the 90s growth was even lower. The noughties growth was even lower than that, and about the same in the 2010s. And like we can see the mess we've been in the last in the 2020s so far. Obviously, there was COVID. But I mean, she did have, I mean, there was her diagnosis was correct, wasn't it? About the lack of growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people have a problem with the kind of growth narrative, especially in light of a climate crisis and the way in which we might want to grow. But I think her diagnosis of the problem may well have been right, but she has also been part of the process of why we have low levels of growth and the reduction in wages or wage stagnation, 0-hour contracts, the immense insecurity that people have, consumption culture. That means that a lot of people are in debt. These are all things that, over time mean that an economy is going to stagnate. And then you are hit by crisis. And we live in a world now where there will be crisis after crisis. Of course, the pandemic, now with inflation, but of course, there's going to be multiple climate issues that will weaken food systems all around the world. So, you've got to govern and have policies in a very different way now. And this is one of the issues that we're having in response to this crisis, that we're doing, the same old thing that we would do before, which is focus on interest rates. And that's just not going to work. So I think she was right that we have a deep-seated problem of a kind of lack of growth, a lack of people feeling there's opportunities for them for good work. But a whole set of solutions were entirely incorrect and would make things a lot worse. Going that way is great. It's great she's gone. But, the alternative, and this is really scary, is to have more public spending cuts, as if those are the only two options, right? It's unbelievable, really, to be here 12 years later and still be talking about austerity when we know not only is that really bad for public services, you can't do society on the cheap, but also that it squeezes growth. You can't reduce public spending when people are also not spending. It's just basic. So whatever comes after is also not going to deliver. And I think this is one of the things, right? We heard so much about leveling up. What in any way we had leveling up? Not at all. We're talking about bringing Boris Johnson back, right?
We'll come on to that. But before we talk about austerity as well, and what I found quite striking is actually take corporation tax, because under Rishi Sunak, he was going to increase corporation tax from 19%, which it got slashed down to, I think it was 29% when the Tories came to power in 2010. And increase it to 25%. And the argument he made was correct, which was cutting corporation tax hadn't worked because it hadn't increased in investment. So, it's interesting, isn't it? Because that actually blew a hole in a lot of Tory ideology, which is you cut taxes, but it pays for itself because then companies will suddenly invest more, employ more, and you'll get loads of growth. But what she was trying to do had been actually so clearly shown to be unworkable that even Rishi Sunak, who is an ideological right-winger, had confessed it didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was quite interesting to hear about, increasing taxes from the likes of Rishi Sunak on corporations. The problem is that the problems are so wide-ranging now that just a bit of a tax increase on corporations without dealing with the way in which shareholders are treated, without dealing with the way in which the whole kind of financial market is working, and without dealing with relatively low wages and wage stagnation and insecurity of work, high house prices, and the rest of it. It's just it's one tiny thing to deal with a whole host of problems. And so we still, even with Rishi Sunak, have a government that wouldn't want to spend, although, they've made it more difficult to spend and borrow because they've made the UK look like a basket case in terms of global markets. But, actually, you can't solve the problems that we have right now without a big investment program and without a fundamental rethink of the way the economy is working. So I was very, very, very sure that when Boris Johnson came in with his levelling up agenda that he would fail. And it's failed in like multiple ways politically as well, of course. And it's because they just don't have the money to back it up. Like there's just, we've had decades of deindustrialization and areas like really left behind. We have, we do really badly in terms of education compared to other G7 countries. We have huge inequalities across the country and within cities as well, including London. So I think they'll bring in someone like Rishi Sunak potentially, or Penny Mordaunt, and they'll say, oh, this is a way to calm the markets or whatever, but they're not going to have answers to our problems.
It's just interesting, just to have a bit of a laugh here. It's just Guido Fawkes back in August during the leadership race, you can sense a palpable despair of most of the broadsheet punditry as it dawns on them that Liz Truss is in all likelihood going to be Prime Minister and will probably go on to smash Keir Starmer in the general election.
Isn't there so many mad things like that just a few weeks ago?
I always have to say, I always found this, I'm not like, obviously I get things wrong, but on Liz Truss, I never understood it. I understood, I keep saying this, so if people have heard it, I'm sorry I keep saying it, but David Cameron, I got what, like he had the Blair type communication thing. I got that. Theresa May, I got the kind of, she cultivated this public spirited, flashy image until she blew up. Boris Johnson, again, he'd been mayor of London and had a kind of personality that appealed to a section of the electorate. Liz Truss didn't understand what the hell that was about. Didn't understand it was just kind of very unpopular right-wing libertarian economics, terrible communicator. Anyway, never understood why anyone took that seriously myself. Just in terms of the impact because I want to talk about political instability and the root of it. But we were already, I mean, if you want to, tell us what the economic landscape you think is going to look like in Britain and how badly has Liz Truss and the economic program made it worse in the long term?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky right now to work with a number of countries around the world, including some rich countries that have, gone in quite hard and quite quickly in terms of protecting the poorest in society from the impacts of inflation rises. I was at the annual meetings of the World Bank and the IMF last week, which is not a comfortable place for a socialist anti-imperialist to be. But they, we were the butt of every joke. Everyone wanted to ask me what's going on in the UK. You guys are like making all the wrong decisions. Liz Truss isn't lying that of course inflation and there's a global problem, but we've really dealt with this and taken every wrong turn. And so what does this look like? What it looks like, potentially a recession. I think that's very likely. I think it looks like people's mortgages drastically going up. I think it's frightening. We in Chinkford and Woodford Green have had a block which used to be Walthamstow Dog Stadium for people that know, which is housing now, L&Q manage, and they've just given Section 21 to like 28 households, and these households are in deep trouble. The amount of rent that they'll have to pay to move somewhere else is just like shocking. These are families, they're in deep stress. I mean, this is a time of profound insecurity for many, many people, and not just working class people, actually, a lot of middle class homeowners as well. And that does not bode well, because when people are insecure, they're not going to spend money. Businesses are insecure as well. They're not going to employ more people. And so we are in for a period of great difficulty in terms of the economics of it. And, it's really important to humanize it. I think often, economists talk about the bigger picture, but it's really important to remember that people are getting served, and these are U-turns that the government has made as well. Like, people are being kicked out of their homes right now, and this is just the beginning.
The thing I was going to talk about, because obviously there we can just see how worse things are going to get. And I really think we haven't absorbed just how terrible things are going to get. And actually now, with the paring back of the economic support package for energy bills, people are looking at £5,000 energy bills. Not sustainable. It just isn't possible for people to be able to spend that amount of money on their energy bills. But my working theory of the political turmoil of the last 6 years is Tory Prime Minister after Tory Prime Minister, they're being felled by an economic model that doesn't produce rising living standards. Take David Cameron. Would the Brexit result have happened without resentment, it's stagnating living standards? I don't think so. I think that pushed it over the line. That got rid of him. Theresa May, the snap general election of 2017, when she thought she'd wipe out the Labour Party. Well, Labour surged in large part because, again, anger at stagnating living standards, which people thought Labour had a better answer to. And again, Boris Johnson, people might go, well, that was Partygate, wasn't it? But it was a combination of people's anger at his illicit partying in government and his lying about it, and the fact the cost of living crisis was accelerating, and the government weren't addressing it. And you could see that in the polling throughout, this year. A lot of that was feeding into the anger at Boris Johnson, and that partly led to his downfall too. Liz Truss, I don't even need to explain. I mean, that's right, isn't it? The economic model is at the root of actually this country's almost comical political, not comic, I mean, it isn't comical, it's actually quite tedious, political turmoil.
I mean, there's another part of what's happened there. So you're right, absolutely, on the economy and the stagnating living standards. The fact that people just don't think their children's lives are going to be better than theirs, or their own lives if they're young, right? And that's not really what the social contract that we have with the people that govern us. That's, we're used to kind of generation on generation being better off. I think the thing that's missing from that is actually, at the same time, the wealth accumulation at the top has given those in power this sense of entitlement and privilege that's so deep and profound that they can think, like, right now we can just exchange leaders and no one's going to really push back. The public aren't going to stand up to us. We can just continue to lie, put out divisive narratives, whether it's about dividing the working class by white and non-white, whether it's about, distracting us with, really horrible and horrific narratives. They've been able to do that till now, give their friends, PPE contracts and the rest of it. We've seen this absolute ability, which is corruption. I mean, this ability for the very rich to rule the country and do what they want, because they have got a lot richer, and they've had an establishment around them that has got a lot richer as well. But now I think what we're seeing at points is this clashing of that, who very out of touch people trying to do exactly the wrong thing, with the fact that people are like, okay, it's 12 years now. And you don't, like you say, have a charismatic leader that hasn't been caught out yet in terms of his lies with Boris Johnson. And so, that rude awakening, I think, is very much what we're seeing right now. But, as we've learned in the last few weeks, even a week is a long time in politics, as they say. And so we shouldn't be complacent about the fact that the Tories may rebuild in some way or another in the next few months.
We'll come on to that. Well, that's what I'm about to ask you now, actually. I mean, just in terms of, another fact about Liz Truss, she's become the shortest serving Prime Minister in history, beating the previous record holder, George Canning, who died of tuberculosis 119 days into the job. Actually, that's a lot longer. She only had 44 days. As people have noted, she stood for leader longer than she was actually Prime Minister itself. But in terms of what happens next, so here we go. Let's have a look. Yeah. So basically what's been decided before we came on air, Graham Brady, who chairs the 1922 committee of backbenchers, which basically sets rules for the parliamentary party and how the leadership election will be governed. So candidates need to get 100 MPs supporting them by Monday at 2 p.m. if they want to get through. Members vote if there's more than one. Now, that is, people think that will stop Boris Johnson, that they don't think that he'll get 100 MPs to back his bid. If we look at how candidates did last time, Rishi Sunak got 137, Liz Truss got 113, Penny Mordaunt got 105. I mean, it'd be interesting because you'd think a significant chunk of Truss's supporters may well go to Boris Johnson. I think very few of Sunak. Obviously, there's huge bad blood now between the Sunak and Johnson camps. I mean, I think it's likely to be Rishi Sunak or Penny Mordaunt based on that 100 figure. It's clear, isn't it? Whatever happens, they're going to do austerity. That's what's going to happen now. It's going to be cuts to public services. But I guess the issue there might put devil's advocate, go, well, maybe they don't have a choice. If they don't do cuts, the markets will go haywire again and we'll be back into turmoil.
Well, I think there is a choice. I think there was a really good comment on Financial Times that a banker had written. I don't know if you saw it a few weeks ago, which was like the most liked comment on the day of the mini budget, disaster budget. That just said that actually, this makes me richer, but we can't actually function without public services, without good public services. And the problem here again is that, the trade unions are doing a stellar job. People are getting very, very angry. When you're going to have nurses out, teachers out, when you have different public sector workers saying this is enough, I think that there's enough people within the public that understand that it's too much. Remember, Boris Johnson came in and won by saying he wasn't going to do austerity and by saying that he was going to level up. He had actually adopted a lot of lines from the political left in order to get in. And so this is going to be hugely unpopular. And it's really important that we keep saying that there are other options here. They don't need to cut in this way. And it's ideological. I mean, it's the same thing. It will just be about small stay, getting the NHS ready to privatize more parts of it. I don't think we should shy away from saying that what it is. And I think in a way they can play us if they say, well, we can't cut taxes, so therefore we have to do austerity. No, you don't have to do austerity. We owe money to the Bank of England. It's a very different situation. Listen, I'm working with countries around the world that actually don't have any fiscal space. And they're still trying everything they can to make sure they deliver for services for people. So we really do need to get ready to call them out on this. And I think, the Labour Party's got much stronger lines in the last few months on just pushing back on these arguments.
I mean, the interview, for example, Gary Stevenson, who people might know, obviously, he's a former city trader. People might think, oh, unlikely person to be making these arguments. He was the most profitable city trader. He made his millions, some from working class background, but when he was in his early 20s, by betting that inequality would mean that Britain would not recover, have a proper economic recovery from the financial crash. And he was right. And that's why he made his money, basically. But his argument now actually is, there is actually an economic imperative for taxing the rich and wealth in particular more than ever now, because, the cost of borrowing now has gone up. It's not like 2010 onwards when that was a squandered time, when the cost of borrowing was so low that, you could have borrowed to invest, and the Tories slashed capital spending, they slashed public services. But now the cost has gone up. But that just says now, well, actually, you clearly just have to increase taxes on wealth to avoid austerity, which has already strangled the economy and caused political turmoil.
Yeah, I think there's a combination of things that can happen here. Absolutely, I agree. And when you've had wealth accumulation so strong, I mean, over COVID, we had the billionaires, like their wealth doubled while everyone else was struggling. I mean, you can do an energy levy taxes. You can do what we call solidarity wealth taxes. So essentially you tell a story about this really difficult time that we are having, and you say, well, we're going to put an extra tax on wealth or higher incomes, and we're going to recycle that back into supporting people. And absolutely, now's the time to make that argument. Other countries are making that argument and putting those taxes in place, and Europe, the EU is doing it as well. And we can make that argument. I think you still have to look at where we can borrow to invest. And I think this is where it becomes very important to have a very clear plan of investment that returns in terms of more highly paid jobs, because actually markets will react when they can see that a government has a plan for not just investing to spend, not just borrowing to spend, but spend in something that will return and make the country stronger over time. And so that's the sort of conversation that needs to be had. And it is the combination of the two. So I think, the problem is so big that we can't just alone focus on taxing the rich, although that is definitely part of it. But we need to have a investment plan as well that goes along that, aside that.
I'll just go through some of the comments from the super chats. David Brown. I'm going to answer this question later because basically, we're so lucky to have obviously Faiza selected, and the one thing I'm not going to do is get Faiza in trouble with the Labour Party at all costs.
Please don't get me in trouble.
Not going to do that. David Baratta says, if we get an election this year, polls are predicting the near alienation of the Tories and Labour gaining 500 plus seats. That would make Keir the most powerful man in the country. What would that look like? Death of the left. So I'm not going to get you to answer that, but maybe it just shows that actually Labour will have a historic opportunity if they won that big a majority, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, listen, one thing that when there's a Labour government that has that big a majority, or even anything close to that, it doesn't have to play into the same horrific narratives of anti-immigration, and it just can be unapologetic in terms of having very clear progressive stances on what we do with the economy, how we build society, how we build unity between each other, how we build trust again in government, have transparency, have democracy. And so I think that this is not, that kind of majority is not just like, an opportunity just to be like relaxing. And I think that Keir Starmer understands that. I do think that that would be an opportunity to change things for better, learning some of the lessons from the last time we were in government. And I think, it would be wonderful. It would be wonderful to just have so few Tories. Oh my God, to like all these years, Owen, of going on TV and having to be like 3 Tories and yourself, it'd be amazing to have that switch.
I mean, just on that, myself, what I would say, because I know there are those who go, well, actually, I mean, there were some people who were maybe I'd call Blairites were like, haha, the left will be rendered irrelevant. But actually, what I think will happen is Labour will obviously raise expectations by getting rid of the Tories. But, the role of the left in that position will be to try and get Labour to be as transformative and radical as possible, because it's not like New Labour in 1997, which came to power in a time of relative social peace, because the economy was growing because of an unsustainable financial bubble, but it was growing and living standards are going up. This time they're going to come to power in a massive, massive social catastrophe. So the role of the left, I think, particularly outside Parliament, will be to put pressure on them. Kieran Buckley, I feel Penny Mordaunt as PM could squeeze out a win in the next election. She's not riddled with scandals like Sunak and Johnson are. I don't know about you. I thought she was the one to worry about when she stood last time, before she stood. But her leadership campaign was like ridiculous, I thought. I mean, she was seen for just on one thing as a kind of a trans ally, and then she just came up with these really just gross jokes about trans people and didn't win anyone's respect. It just looked stupid and ridiculous. I'm not sure. I don't buy the Penny Mordaunt thing. I thought she did a good parliamentary performance with Angela Rayner once, which is why she got a load of hype. I wouldn't be that worried about Penny Mordaunt myself if I were Labour. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think she appeals to the Tory base, but I think I'm not really clear about what her ideas are, how she would, move the country forward, and I don't know that she has any. I mean, she would have said them surely during her campaign, and so I'm not worried about that. I think one thing that will be really frustrating if Rishi Sunak comes in is that the immediate story will be like the first non-white prime minister, and it will just be so frustrating, and they'll be able to use that because unfortunately too many people in the media will like start reaching out and wanting to make that a story. They'll use that as some cover to be like, this is new, this is exciting. And I think that is, apart from it being total rubbish, because it's not representation in the way that we would hope, it's not a change of ideas, but they'll have some space to use that. So yeah, I would be more worried about Rishi Sunak.
Canna Karen says, can you speak on Truss being the first Prime Minister since Macmillan to not have a Doctor Who premiere during her tenure? It's just a really funny statistic. You might be able to explain. I'm not intelligent enough to understand this question, or not. It's a statement. Stuart Atkinson, as a STEM guy, as in STEM, STEM, I shouldn't be having to explain to economic folk that you can't run a water wheel or any cycle trying to keep the water at the apex. I don't know what that means. I've tried. Oh, well.
It's probably too clever for me as well. But yeah.
Roger, will the Tories get on the front foot to save themselves by windfalling the banks as well as big energy? Surely they don't have to move far now to be on the left of Labour on tax policy. Well, it's interesting because people forget Margaret Thatcher in 1981 did a windfall tax on the banks because they'd hiked interest rates so much. Banks obviously then profited from it, and even Thatcher then did a windfall tax. So actually Liz Truss, in refusing a windfall tax on energy companies, was to the right of Margaret Thatcher in the early 1980s, what a place to be. I don't know. I wonder now, what I think is interesting is, do you think they'll have to just, I mean, will they have to do something, give something on the economy, basically, to given what they've done is been so disastrous? But I think as well, do you think this really has buried right-wing economic ideas in the way that in the 70s is used, like the winter discontent, to go, oh, the left, you know, collectivism, this is what happens. In the same way, if any politician says we need to cut taxes on the rich, people go, oh, you want to return to the bad old days when you crashed the economy doing that? Do you know what I mean?
I do think there'll be a bit of that. I wonder, like, if IEA and like Taxpayers Alliance and all of those guys, if their phone has stopped ringing from the media, you know, they were like always on TV saying this rubbish about this economic model of trickle down, and they've been very clearly shown that it's just not going to work. And so I wonder if this could be a time when, you know, that's just kind of shut out. It's just not a possibility. Let's hope. I mean, that would be a good outcome. I mean, it's been proven so many times. I can't believe we're going through this again. It makes me feel really old, honestly, that we just feel like I'm just having the same arguments that I had 20 years ago.
Same. I suppose partly because I call this general election now just funny, really. I mean, the problem is, I mean, obviously it is ludicrous. You know, it's one thing to get rid of a prime minister and replace them with another. That Labour have done that. Blair and Brown, they did that. But to do that twice is really taking the piss, if we're going to be honest with you. But there's the latest that they can call an election is January 2025. That is miles away. Mm-hmm. Oh my God. I just feel a bit nauseous. That is a long time. And I just wonder, you know, obviously public opinion overwhelmingly wants an election. But the Tories would kind of have to be suicidal to do that because they'd get wiped out. So they'll hang on, won't they, for dear life, I'd imagine.
I think they'll all hang on because they just don't care enough. I'm sorry, they don't care enough about the country to just leave and like lose their jobs. I think, or just to say, actually, just a quick plug, we're having a campaign day in Woodford on the 5th of November, and people need to come down and we need to do whatever we can, protest, you know, go and knock on the doors of political candidates that you like. And, you know, just to show like, look, this is not okay. This is just not okay. You can't just like swap in and out leaders without the rest of us having a say. I mean, it was bad enough with Liz Truss when, what was it, like 200,000 people. But I mean, like now it's like no one, like it will be just the MPs that vote for whoever our prime minister is. And traveling a lot over the last year, people cannot believe, like people ask me all the time, like, can they just do that? And I'm like, yeah, they can just do that. But we really need to cause a lot of noise about that and just demonstrate that it's not okay. I do think that they will try and hold on. I think it would be, if they called an election now, then of course they would do really, really badly. And who's going to want to take that on? I'm just wondering, like, what Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt are thinking right now. They're not going to want to come in, call an election and lose their job with it, and also be another shortest running prime minister. You know, it's they're going to wait at least until May. But if you can build the public pressure, actually, someone made a good point to me about the coronation. And if they could use that, you know, a kind of surge of nationalism, I don't know, try and like tie it with that somehow. I think some Tory MPs will be like, I'm going to lose my job. Let me go and get a better paid job right now. And that might cause some by-elections to happen. So it will be very unstable. But whether they have to call a general election, I don't think they have to, but I don't think it won't be 2025. I think it will be next year.
Blimey. Sorry, just thinking just how long left under.
I know, they're just destroying everything. We can't really have them there much longer. It's extremely.
But whatever I say about Keir Starmer, I have said it. And, you know, I've always said, I've always voted Labour. Unlike some of my detractors on social media who voted for the Liberal Democrats not that long ago, were like, why are you so critical of Labour? Well, I'm an independent commentator. It's not my job to work for Labour Party, to be honest. I'm not a press officer for the Labour Party. But, I mean, you know, whatever my problems with the current Labour Party, getting rid of the Tories would be, I have to say, a huge relief. And it's whatever we think, it's the precondition. Whatever anyone thinks, about Labour, whatever reservations they might have, it is the precondition for this country being able to get out of the absolute mess we're in. Just finally, just to emphasise the plug of Faiza, do go and campaign for her. Look up, just Google, I suppose if you go Faiza Shaheen, it'll come up with your website. And then
Faiza for Chinkford.
Faiza for Chinkford. .com.
But also, yeah, 5th of November. I don't think it's on my Instagram. I need to tweet about it, actually. That's terrible of me to plug it without tweeting about it. But yeah.
We can do it.
Yeah,
and presumably, go and do that and then go and have your fireworks afterwards. What a treat. So do that. She's going to be an amazing MP. So it'll be, I suppose, in a way, our AOC. No pressure.
I wish.
I'm just going to leave you on the some final words from Liz Truss.
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter.
Turns out she was a quitter, not a fighter. Very sad. The Liz Truss era has come to a tragic end. We won't miss the terrible destruction she's inflicted on millions of people in the economy. We will miss some of the content that she has generated for us. But hopefully this is the death rattle of a Conservative Party, which has presided over the worst turmoil this country's had since the end of World War II. Longest 2 decades, we're going to have 2 decades of lost living standards, an absolute catastrophe for millions and millions of people. So let's hope this isn't just the fall of Liz Truss, but also not just the fall of the Tories, but hopefully the beginning of an end of an economic model and a right-wing economic ideology which has unleashed mayhem in this country, and millions of people have, and I'm afraid will continue to pay the price until we do something about that. Faiza, you've been an inspiration as ever, so thank you so much for joining us. And go and knock on doors for everyone. Lots of love. Yeah. I'll see you soon. I owe you a drink. Lots of love. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Great stuff from Faiza. She is an icon, I would say. I just thought we should go live because of the burning skip. Let me just go through, some super chats again. Thank you to Josephine Cameron. Thank you to, hello. Sorry, I'm not doing this very well. I normally put them in a document, but I've messed up. Well, someone else does, but they're not here. So it's just me on my own, flying blind. Thank you to Canuck Errant. Thank you to David Bowata as ever. Thank you to Roger. Thank you to Stuart Atkinson. Thank you to Rebecca, who says People's Assembly demo in London 5th of November. So if people want to go and march then, I think that's a very good idea. Thank you to Dan Brooks, who says I'm too ill for this chaos, but I've been spun out by Dizzy Lizzy, which makes me look unintentionally sexist by saying that. Join the union. Yeah, Dizzy. Not sure about that. But I hope you're okay, because, all my best, obviously, there. Paul Whelan, who obviously rightly says Pfizer for future Labour leader. Thank you to Yushikini Ram. Some dollar for the tofu eating Rokarati fund. Oh, yeah, that's the Suella Braverman thing. Someone said, let me bring up, oh, no, I probably won't be able to find the tweet in time. I should have done this earlier. There was just an extremely funny tweet, basically. If I can just find it, because it was so good. People have noted that the lettuce, of course, has outlived Liz Truss. The Daily Star got a lettuce to see if it would survive Liz Truss. It did. Sean Bartlett said about Suella Braverman, people might have seen her ranting about tofu eating Guardian readers. Suella Braverman just not hitting it like Pretty did. It kind of feels like Mucha and Amel. For those who aren't aware, this is the Sugar Babes he's talking about. Mucha was replaced by ML. Obviously going for the same vibe, but the magic's gone. Doesn't have the range. Pretty was scary to live under. This one, it's just like, tofu eaters, is it? Okay. Yeah. I mean, she was too much of a caricature, Suella Braverman, for it to work. Pretty was actually just quite disturbing in lots of ways, I thought. Suella Braverman is just like, come on, you're just kind of reading out Daily Mail and Daily Telegraph headlines. We can all do that. But obviously it was still funny when she went. Yes. So, I think I just wanted to come live because of what's happened. Do check out my interview with Gary Stevenson, which I mentioned. It's on the channel. He's a former Citibank trader who makes the economic case against austerity. That's very important. Not just the moral case, but the economic case as well. We've got lots of videos coming up. As you're saying, we've been doing one a day at the moment. You can press like on this video, subscribe. Do leave your comments. I do read them, including the ones which are very insulting. But I've got thick skin. So, I'm from Stockport. Do support us on patreon.com/Jose84. You keep the show on the road. You think I do this, I did try doing this by myself and I have struggled, if I'm honest. Thanks to the super chats. Just in terms of what comes next, we're going to be having lots of coverage of the Tory leadership race, the possible return of Boris Johnson. Now that limit's there, I don't think it's going to be Boris Johnson, guys. I think it's going to be Rishi Sunak or probably him. or Penny Mordaunt. I think what will be interesting about Rishi Sunak is obviously a lot of the Johnson camp hate him. They think he knifed Boris Johnson in the back by resigning, if people remember, just before Boris Johnson's final departure. And as a consequence, we've seen the kind of hard right of the Conservatives. They're just ungovernable. I don't think they're going to go, oh, well, we better quiet down a bit because otherwise we'll screw the Tories in the election. I think they've just become too radicalized and too extreme. So I think if Rishi Sunak takes over, he'll face constant rebellion from Johnson's true blue diehard supporters. They don't see him as one of, even though he was a Brexiteer, he campaigned for Brexit and he's a right-wing ideologue. Also, we need to nail Rishi Sunak, by the way, in terms of, this guy during COVID brought lockdown skeptics into number 10. People might remember, maybe don't want to think about the pandemic era for obvious reasons, but we had after the first lockdown, when infections were surging, he successfully stopped restrictions being reimposed, which just meant that infection spiraled out of control. And then we had to have the November lockdown, and then, of course, the long winter to spring lockdown of 2021, partly because of that, because we didn't act quickly enough because of Rishi Sunak. And Rishi Sunak did Eat Out to help out, which spurned a load of course, clusters of COVID, which killed people. Rishi Sunak boasted during the Tory leadership campaign, or the video came out then, of taking money from poor urban areas to give to affluent Conservative areas. Absolutely outrageous. He also called in that leadership election for people who were defiled British history, as he put it, or whatever. I can't remember the exact terms. People who basically say uncomfortable truths about British history to be referred to the to prevent or counter terrorism or counter extremism programs. It's the sort of authoritarian, scary policy you'd expect from Viktor Orban's Hungary. This guy, obviously, we saw in terms of his tax arrangements, all the rest of it. This guy is a multi-billionaire. Well, multi-million. I don't know. He's the richest MP by a long margin. But the idea he's suddenly some sort of moderate, give me another one, absolutely ludicrous. He's a right-wing ideological conservative who is one of the guilty men who plunged this country into disaster. And I hate the way you get this all of a sudden. People are like, oh, here's a decent conservative. They always do this with Tories who have a long history of slashing public services, slashing the welfare state, doing horrible things on immigration, refugees. But, for a lot of liberals, I'm sorry, politics is, I always say this, but it's a vibe. It's not about substance. Take Rory Stewart. Rory Stewart backed Theresa May's Brexit deal, but they were like, oh, he's almost like a Remainer, like evil Brexiteer Jeremy Corbyn, who opposed Theresa May's Brexit deal because he said it was too hard. And Rory Stewart was an ideological support of austerity, which is what has led this country into a mess. But people are like, oh, he's rational and sensible. It just seems, again, you got this with Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy Hunt, again, he's not going to stand for leader, by the way. But Jeremy Hunt, the NHS is in a mess because of him, in large part. It had the worst squeeze in its funding since, as a proportion of the economy, since its founding under him. Massive staff shortages. Even he conceded that. Left us unprepared for the pandemic and obviously the growing, aging population and social crisis in this country. He is an ideological support of austerity. He said that. He said George Osborne and David Cameron were geniuses for managing to get public acquiescence for austerity. So obviously he wants to do austerity all over again because he's ideologically committed to it. And again, Penny Mordaunt, again, supported all. I know she's presented as a clean skin, but again, she's got this government's policies. She's got, her paws all over the terrible government policies that have been introduced with devastating consequences. They've all got to go, all of them. This is a death cult and they've got to go. Anyway, thank you, everybody. As I said, press like. Do you just press like now on the video and press subscribe? But don't just press subscribe, press the notification bell, because then you'll get video alerts sent to your phone. And I will be back certainly on Sunday, but we might do more lives because the country's constantly in turmoil, but we have got great guests to come. I hope you're doing well, and I will speak to you soon. Lots of love, everyone. Take care.